Hello everyone, welcome to the 9th edition of the Uppsala Young Champions. My name is Jesper and I will be the commentator of this tournament. Uppsala Young Champions is a tournament that has the ambition to be the most important tournament for youths below 20 years old. We are inviting players from Europe and we try to gradually, year by year, to make it a little bit stronger. And this year we have actually managed to reach those. You can see here that we have the following players that is playing in this year's edition. At the very top we have Francesco Zonis from Italy. Then we have Platon Galperin, Elham Abdrulov from Norway. We have Felix Bloberger, the second grandmaster of the tournament. We have Kaan Kukushari from Sweden. We have Vignir Vatnar Stefansson. We have Jakob Leon Pajeken, Tor Fredrik Kåsen, Hampus Sørensen, Semen Mitusov, Ludvig Karlsson, Sim van Del, Edvin Trost, Arthur Kuckenhauser, Gustav Törngren, Arvin Rasti, Joar Östlund, Hugo Wernberg, Axel Falkevall, and so on. I will spare you the time that I am reading up all those names. What is so interesting with this tournament is that this is also a way to present all these great talents that Europe comes up with. In this tournament, of course, we will have a special eye on Francesco Zonis, who just finished in fourth place in the Junior World Championship with the same point as the winner. But behind him, I believe that we can see a great bunch of players that I'm really looking forward to follow. Of course, you know, we are in Sweden, so what we want to do is also to give our young talents the chance to test their strength against some of the best talents of Europe. What we will do is that every second day we will have a single round, and every second day we will have a double round. The double rounds start at 10 o'clock and then the second round of that day will start at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The single days normally are played at 4 o'clock or on Sunday actually on 12 o'clock. So Wednesday next week, then we will have the final result and see who will be the winner of the 9th edition of Uppsala Young Champions. So let's take a look at the games that we have today. So first of all, we have Sondre Mela from Norway, who is facing Francesco Zonis from Italy, the favorite of the tournament. Second board, we will following Platon Galperin against Benedict Bryan. And then we will have Elham Abdrulov from Norway playing against Alexander Oliver May. And we will have Felix Bloberger playing against Stefan Brim. We will have Vidar Gran against Kaan Kukushari. We will have Vignir Vatnar Stefansson against William Johansson. We will have Victor Montian against Jakob Leon Pajeken. We will have Tor Fredrik Kåsen against Oliver Nilsson. We will have Vidar Hagevi against Hampus Sørensen. We will have Semen Mitusov against Nerai Harish, and you can see that this game has already finished. Probably that is because that Mitusov never actually appeared. Something has happened, so he did not receive for the first round. Then we have Alvin Lind Bertelsen against Ludvig Karlsson. We will have Sim van Del against Oscar Morell. We will have Ludvig Morell against Edvin Trost. We will have Arthur Kuckenhauser against Julia Östensson. We will have David Nesse against Gustav Törngren. We will have Arvin Rasti against Anton Frank. We will have Victor Liljehöök against Joar Östlund. We will have Matteus Buckert against Axel Falkevall. And we will have Hugo Wernberg against Oliver Wedenberg. And of course, during this commentating, I will try to follow the top boards, the top players, and then I will try to find out those interesting positions and games that can be a little bit entertaining for you following this commentating. So let's take a look at the very first game between Sondre Mela and Sonis Francesco. And here we have, if we take it from the very beginning, we have d4 as the first move. We have, then we have, no, sorry, that was my mistake. We do it like this, and we'll see if I do it like this. Okay, so as you can see, white is heading for a London system setup with the bishop on f4. This is normally a very solid way to play, and one of the things that I actually discussed with some of the players before the first round was, if you are facing this type of grandmaster like Francesco Sonis, that is much higher rated against, if you play against them, what should your strategy be like? And normally what I recommend is two ways to do it. Either you go for really difficult complications, because normally the strong player wants to play a position that is a little bit more safe, not risky, because you know everyone can make like a tactical mistake sometimes. And so that is one way of approaching a higher rated opponent, that is to go for real heavy complications. Or you can play really safe, just good structure, try to swap pieces, go for a safe ending. What will happen normally is that the stronger player will try to create complications and need to take risks. So this strategy that we can see from Sondre is normally the safe way of playing against a much stronger player. So the London system, well, it makes sense. Then the question is, what should Sonis do in this type of situation? Well, normally you just develop your pieces, and a little bit later in the middle game you try to go for this kind of complications. And another way of thinking, and that is what I see now, that is to try to create a more unbalanced position. Because unbalanced positions normally needs a more depth when it comes to the strategy and the ideas of the position. And as you can see here, bishop from b7 taking on f3, that means that black is giving up his bishop, pair of bishops, but on the other hand, white will have worse pawn structure, like this. And that is of course something that will unbalance the position and give the chance for black to get this kind of positions that you normally head for if you are the stronger player. So g6 comes, and of course, yeah, it makes sense. The bishop on g7, black is playing for a better structure, put up the pieces in the right way, and you know, now it's just developing time. And this is also a little bit interesting, because normally in this type of positions you want to play c4 before you move out your knight to get a grip of the center. But in this type of position, when e take f3 is done, we are already, I would say, in an unusual situation, not much opening theory. And of course, you need to think about that if you play, for example, if you play c4 in this type of position, there is a risk that black maybe even plays something like d5, or try to give white isolated pawn on d4. That might be one more weakness. So knight c3 is, of course, it's interesting, a little bit unusual, but one idea that sometimes you can see when you play this kind of London system is to go for knight c3 and bishop f4, and then you try to go for an attack with queen d2, try to swap bishops on h6 and so on. So knight h5, that's interesting as well. What black is trying to do here is to create a little bit of a chaos in the white setup. Black wants to put pressure on white, like I said before, with queen d2 and bishop h6 normally. But now white need to make a choice. Either you go to g5 or you go to e3, queen d2, So it will be interesting to see what is the choice that white will make. One possibility is, of course, to play like bishop to e5 to get like a threat on the rook on h8 before, and after f6 you move back like this. But, you know, it's not, no. Maybe this is the best way, but on the other hand, what is happening now is that now it's not possible to play like the queen here and then go with the bishop to h6 like this. That is not possible because the bishop is on h2. So maybe this idea has fallen out. And then the question is what white should play for in this position, because the knight on c3 normally indicates that it is an attack that white is going for. So, okay, let's wait a bit to see. Normally, of course, this type of moves, bringing out the knight to one of the sides, is not something you recommend. Instead, you know, they want to be in the center, they want to take control of the center. So normally you keep them on f6 and not moving them to the h file or the a file. Again, like I said, what black is trying to do is to disturb white in his normal procedure in this type of positions. Well, I think this can be quite interesting, because, and not the least, in this position, the question is what way white would go for. So let's take a look at some other games. So what we have here is another position I think it's time to look at. And it is the game between Alexander May and Elham Abdroulf. I don't know so much about Alexander May, and I must say that one of the great things for me to being the commentator in this type of tournament, that is that I get the chance to see the champions of the future. So that's why I also think this can be really interesting for you, because what you do is that you see them at a very early stage in their career, and then you know that probably some of them will be world stars in a couple of years. And one of those players that I believe strongly in is Elham Abdroulf. For a very long time, he has been one of the most prominent talents of Norway. And as you probably know, Norway, with Magnus Carlsen in the driving seat, they are one of the leading countries when it comes to chess these days, and they are developing talent programs, and they have like chess colleges, and you know, a lot of young players are moving up in the areas, not really yet in the area of Magnus, but at least they are these days, they have quite a strong team when it comes to Olympiads and the national teams. And Elham has been for a long time one of the most promising players. Now he's up to 24.95 in ELO, and I have a feeling that he will come even closer because he's really addicted to chess. He's thinking of chess quite a lot, and it will be very interesting to follow his journey during the following years. And let's take a look at the start. Okay, e4 was played. Classical move. We continue with c6, the Caro-Kann. In this opening, what black is doing is to, instead of challenging white directly in the center in the traditional way, classical way, to play e5 on e4, d5 on d4, and so on, instead black wants to challenge by playing c6 and d5. This is a very solid structure, it's a very solid opening, and one good thing with that, if you are like Elham in this case, the higher rated player, is that instead of challenging in the opening, these days you probably know that quite a lot of the games are actually decided already at the hotel room. You know, people are preparing for the games by preparing the openings and so on. And normally if you're a much stronger player, you do not want to get into some kind of preparation. Instead you want to play something solid and let your better understanding of the middle game and the end game be the one that decides the games. So d4, d5, and like I said, the Caro-Kann is typical one of these openings where it's not normally the opening theory that is decisive, but actually the understanding of the structure when it comes to the middle games. So d5 came. Knight d2, of course, there are several different possibilities. There are knight c3, there is e5, you can take on d5, so white has different options. Knight d2 is quite solid, and black now took on e4, knight take on e4, and now black has got a choice. The most classical way of playing here for black is to play bishop f5, and with that bishop f5, then we have, of course, there are a lot of theory in all types of openings these days, but normally, you know, it will be something like this, and you can play like h4, you go like h4, h6, and then normally what is happening is that white has a little bit more space with this extra pawn in the center on d4, but black, on the other hand, has a very solid structure with the pawn on c6 and e6 to follow. So, okay, so knight e2, what happened was take on e4, knight take e4, and now, instead of bishop f5, Elam chose to play knight to f6. And the classical way to play is to take the knight like this, and not the least, let's say 20 years ago, the most common move to play for black in this position was to take with the g-pawn. And you know, to create a little bit more of action in the center. You know that the beginner's rule is that if you have to take in this type of position, you always take against the center, you know, so you can get an extra pawn supporting your center. And in this case as well, as you can see, we have also the possibility to go for this line here with a rook on g8 and so on. There are a lot of theory in this line, of course. But the drawback with this is that you actually got a very strange pawn structure, and not the least this h-pawn on h7, and also this structure in the center might be weaknesses further on in the game. So instead, Elam did choose to play the extremely solid move e take f6. And as you can see in this type of position, what is happening is that white more or less has got an extra pawn, because black's double pawned on f7, f6. Compare that with this extra pawn here on the d line, and we get 4 against 3 for white, and now of course we have this. So what is the idea of black? Well, first of all, what black has got is a very solid defense on the king side with an extra pawn here after castling short side, because that's what you normally do with black in this type of position. Then it will be very difficult for white to make something on the king side. If there is if white choose to castle alongside, black will have a strong defense against an attack with the pawns on the king side. Instead, and not the least if you play with a player that is a real, attacking player, like in this case, maybe white is this type of player who likes to play dynamic and this type of openings, then this can be a good choice. The drawback is, of course, that strategically black will face a hard time for a long time, as you have this extra pawn on d4 for white. The normal idea for white is to start to swap pieces, because if you swap off all of them, so we have a simple pawn ending, then white for sure will be winning. So for every piece that is swapped off, not the least if it's the queens and so on, white will have a little bit better chances to win this type of position. But what has happened to me sometimes when I play this with white is that you overestimate this, because even though there might be swapped off pieces, black can have other advantages as a compensation. So let's see what happened in the game. Okay, bishop c4, normal move, bishop to d6, queen e2, bishop e7, and here again, like I said, this is a bit it's pros and cons with everything. In this case, the normal move for black is queen to e7, but then for sure white will swap off the queens, and has got one step further on to this end game that you try to reach, this pawn end game, by swapping off all the pieces. So bishop e7 came instead. And of course, then you can ask yourself, okay, was it worth it? First you play bishop d6 and then you go back. On the other hand, is the queen really good at e2? Well, that's a question. So let's come on with knight f3, of course, supporting the pawn on d4, castling, castling, bishop to d6. Well, now it came. Rook to e1, normal move, bishop to g4, everything is normal. Knight to d7, normal, rook a d1. So we have a position, it's not really a theoretical position. It will be like, the player understanding the position best will have an edge. White has got, of course, a small advantage and will have that probably for a long time with his extra pawn on d4. But on the other hand, black really do not have any weaknesses or so on. So it's not so easy for white to make progress. What you normally have to do is just to wait and slowly build up the position, start to swap off pieces at the right time and moment, and play for this endgame in the long run. Or, of course, if black tries to do something drastically, what you do is to take your chances. So, let's see if we have any other game that might be interesting to follow. Of course, this is two plays that this is a game I would like to see, and that is the game between Vidar Gran and Kaan Kukushari. Not the least, Kaan Kukushari is a very interesting player. He has been here in Sweden for now quite some time. He came originally from Turkey and has all the time since he came been one of the most talented and gifted players that we have. At some point, he made a little bit of a stop, but not the least since this chess world was released after the COVID. He has exploded. And in the last year, he has gone from, I think it was almost 2380 to 2480 in only a couple of months' time, due to that he has played a lot of tournaments and had a good coefficient when it comes to the ELO rating. Today he's got 2482, and well, I must say, it was obvious for us from the outside that we saw that when after the tournaments started to come up again after the COVID, you could see that Kaan probably worked very hard at home during these two years when the full society was blocked down, and he has been in the winning seat when it comes to the Swedish chess league that was played online, and he has been challenging and winning different tournaments, where also the top grandmasters of Sweden had to watch out for his strong play. He can play fast, he can play quite strong strategically, but not the least tactically. It seems like he's always on his toes looking for possibilities. He is facing Vidar Gran, and what is interesting with Vidar Gran is also one of these talents that we have been waiting for to take the next steps. He's got 2067 in ELO rating, but my guess is that he is one of those that can make this type of jump. And as you all know, this is so interesting with juniors, because you do not really know on what level they are. What is their real strength? You see their rating, and of course you can see their history and what they have done before. But not the least now since COVID came, and people didn't play so much but was actually practicing and training at home, then some of them are much stronger than the rating and can just explode now when it's time to go out to the world and play chess again. Okay, so it will be interesting. Of course, Kaan is a way high favorite in this game, but Vidar is not, he's strong. He understands chess, so I will look forward to see how Kaan is handling this situation. Okay. So g6 came after c4. We have an English opening that can easily be transposed into some kind of King's Indian or something like that. g3, so it's a fianchetto position. Black will fianchetto the bishop to g7 and white on g2. So bishop came out to g2, and the idea in this position from white, at least at this stage is of course to make use of this great bishop, but heading for b7, and sometimes you even try to move on with your pawns on b2 and on a2. But now, of course, when black has moved out the bishop to g7, it might be a bit problematic, but knight c3, rook b1 and b4 are these kind of standard plans to make use of the little bit better positions on the queen side. Now, an interesting choice, f5. So this is the Dutch defense. And f5, I like this idea of Khan, because like I said in the beginning, Khan, the higher rated player, what he wants is to have a dynamic position where there are possibilities to play an interesting position, not too easy for white to play. So he wants to challenge Vidar. And the idea is that his better understanding of positions should be the difference between the players today. The idea with this f5 is normally that black wants to go for an attack on the king side. And we'll see what's happening. d4, okay, so we are into a classical Dutch defense. Knight to f6 came, knight to c3, d6, and now white has got a choice how to continue. Standard plans is either to, because of the d6, white can play d5, but normally that's okay for black. Black will quite often place e5, then d take e6 will come, and then c6, and you take back the pawn on e6. The other idea that white has got is to play e4, e2 to e4, and the knight can sometimes go to h3, be ready to go to g5, and then you play e4 to get a knight to e4 and make use of this a little bit strange pawn structure that black might get. Instead, b3 came, and what happens now is that white is ready to push the bishop on c1 to b2 to be challenging a future e7 to e5 in this type of position. That is a standard idea for black. Okay, castle c6, no, bishop b2, okay, c6 in this position. This is a typical way of trying to make the bishop on g2 not so strong, as this is hitting the pawn on c6. And then one idea that black has got quite often when the king on e1 has castle king side is to go for queen e8, h6, g5, queen i5, and try to go for that attack here on the king on g1. And, well, strategically, interesting position. It will be interesting to follow this game. d5 came, well, standard idea as well. Of course, what you want to do is to challenge. And black plays, like I said before, also the normal e5. And the question is how white should react to that. Because the normal way is to take on e5, en passant like this. And then you get this type of structure, something like this. And as you can see, okay, we have something that might look like a weak pawn on d6 in this type of position. But normally it's not so easy for white to make use of this weakness. Of course, there can be a push like d6, d5, but also